What's good? It's Wood. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. We have Oscar Valdez, 30 wins and 0 losses, defending his WBC super featherweight title, that's 130 pounds, against Shakur Stevenson, 17 wins and 0 losses, and Shakur Stevenson is going to be defending his WBO super featherweight title. So this is a title unification fight with 2 of the 4 belts. But even though they're just 2 of the 4 belts up for grabs, this is really kind of seen to be the best fighting the best in the 130-pound division. So yeah, there might be 2 other belts floating out there, but this is kind of the consensus match that needs to happen in this division. And we're just very glad that circumstances, if we were lucky enough that both of these guys were fighting under top rank at the right time. So let's get it on. I mean, I had to bring the Earth, Wind, and Fire t-shirt out for this one because this is one of those rare occurrences that we boxing fans are really getting what we want in this one. And it's a little bit surprising to me how much the odds are starting to shade towards Shakur Stevenson. Not that I didn't think he would be a favorite, but I feel like, they opened up at nearly even, but Shakur Stevenson was a slight favorite. And then as time went on, it just kind of widened, the gap to where Shakur Stevenson, you could find him at like a minus 400, meaning that, they've got Oscar Valdez as a like 4.5 to 1 underdog. I wasn't expecting that. Even though Shakur Stevenson's kind of the one reputation-wise who's seen to be, the potential future of the sport. And one of those, maybe the future is now types of deals where, I feel like he was kind of anointed as soon as he turned pro after participating in the 2016 Olympics. He came out with the silver medal, but his reputation was almost that of when people were talking about like the 4 princes, right? The guys who were kind of up and coming in the lightweight division. Gervonta Davis, a little bit older than the others, but basically Teofimo Lopez, Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney, the talk was always, but then there's Shakur Stevenson just 1 or 2 weight classes below that, and who knows, he might end up being, pound for pound better than all these guys. And then, you started seeing him, as a professional, starting to fight super impressively, where he's kind of emerged as one of the best round winners in the game, where it's tough to find rounds that he doesn't win. You got guys who will just knock you the hell out, but will give a few rounds to, to score the knockout later on. I mean, even Gervonta Davis, we've seen him lose some rounds in multiple fights. Shakur Stevenson, at least in this period of his career, is still winning just about every round of all of his fights, even as he's starting to work up the ranks in opponent quality, and obviously, a 2-time belt holder now. And, this collision course between Valdez and Stevenson was actually like years in the making. While Shakur Stevenson was participating in the Olympics, that was around the time, same year, that Oscar Valdez won his WBO featherweight title. So that was 126. And so that was around the time where he was fighting Ernie Sanchez, and then he won the belt against Gradovich. You guys remember him, a former belt holder? Gradovich, you would see him on a lot of the cards. Well, that's who Oscar Valdez beat to get a shot at the vacant WBO featherweight title. And then that was against Matias Rueda. So that's how Oscar Valdez won his first belt. So he actually defended that belt like several times. In fact, that fight that people always cite as like almost like a black mark on Oscar Valdez's, fight-by-fight resume is like the Scott Quigg fight. So this is when Oscar Valdez was still trained by Manny Robles III. That's Andy Ruiz Jr.'s former trainer. That's who Virgil Ortiz Jr. left Robert Garcia to now train with. Manny Robles, not Manny Robles III, but Manny Robles. So that's who was training Oscar Valdez before Eddy Reynoso. And so as Oscar Valdez was defending that WBO featherweight belt, he was fighting opponents like Miguel Mariaga, which ended up being like a very difficult, back and forth, brawl style fight. Like Oscar Valdez has always displayed some sweet science boxing ability. Don't get me wrong. But he has found himself in a lot of those fights that end up being dog fights. Like when he broke his jaw against Scott Quigg. And I kind of give him a pass performance-wise for that fight looking so close. The judges' scorecards had him up like 117, 111, 118 to 110 or something like that. But, the broadcasters and, the fans who were watching thought that it was like one of those that maybe could have gone either way between Valdez and Quigg. And so people, as the story has continued to go on, have kind of cited that as evidence that maybe Oscar Valdez isn't that good of a boxer. But people, I think, forgot that Scott Quigg actually weighed in 4 to 5 pounds over the limit, to where, Oscar Valdez's, team didn't even want to weigh him later on. They said, you know what, we'll just let the fight go on. And then Scott Quigg ended up coming into a 126-pound fight at like over 140 pounds. So he was fighting like a couple divisions up in that ring against Valdez, basically. And Valdez still just hung in there, even as he got his jaw broken. And you could just see the blood just coming out of his mouth onto his stomach and chest, round after round, as he was getting occasionally just rocketed with the left hand. Scott Quigg continued to apply the pressure. He was willing to just take 2 to give 1. And it just ended up being a really nasty fight, where it was Oscar Valdez's sweet science skill coupled with his heart that allowed him to win that fight. So a lot of people look at this as being a negative on Oscar Valdez's career. I say, yeah, I mean, he did get hit a lot, but I came away from that saying the guy's got a ton of heart, because if he was a lesser man, he would not have won that fight. Just given the weight discrepancy, given how determined of a fight Scott Quigg fought against Valdez, Valdez came out on top. It took every bit of courage to do that. I mean, there were parts where he was kind of buckling into the corners because he was getting hit so hard, to the body up top, but he ended up breaking Scott Quigg down, mangling his face in the process. They just both looked like messes after that fight. But that was actually Oscar Valdez's 4th title defense. And then he had 2 more title defenses before he finally went up to 170. And that belt that he left behind, that WBO featherweight belt, is the same belt that Shakur Stevenson, just a couple years into his professional career, because remember, he was a 2016 Olympian, so 2017, 2018, he was basically fighting Joet Gonzalez in 2019 for that vacant WBO featherweight belt. So just as Valdez, vacated his belt, Shakur Stevenson comes in and fights for that vacant title. And so they've actually literally held the same belt in different places of their career. So then Oscar Valdez goes up and fights like Adam Lopez, Jason Velez. He stopped them both at 130. He's now working with Eddy Reynoso. And then he has that showdown fight with Miguel Berchelt, where a lot of people, I mean, the betting odds and everything, really thought Miguel Berchelt was going to win that fight. And sometimes people will forget like what the public sentiment and the betting odds were going into certain fights. If you ever have a question about like, was this a quality win or not? The betting odds are usually a pretty decent indicator on what the public is thinking going into this fight. So, if there's a debate about, oh, well, did he fight this guy when they were past their prime or when they were still at their absolute best? Usually the betting odds kind of tell the story. And Oscar Valdez going in, people were talking about how good Miguel Berchelt was, how his applied pressure was going to be too much, how Oscar Valdez just gets hit too much to be banging in there with somebody who's like a proven killer at 130. Oscar Valdez was still kind of seen to be the new guy coming up a division. And then we got what we got. One of the knockouts of the year. Oscar Valdez upsetting the favorite, Miguel Berchelt, first by outboxing him and then knocking him out cold in the 10th round. Beautiful knockout. And then it was after that Oscar Valdez was about to fight Robson Conceição. He tested positive, he being Oscar Valdez, for PEDs, but they allowed the fight to continue. There was really a lot of disgust around the boxing community. The fact that his title wasn't stripped. Like, we saw David Benavidez get his title stripped for missing weight once, and before that for using cocaine recreationally. Got stripped of the WBC belt then as well. Well, they not only let Oscar Valdez hang on to the belt after testing positive with I believe the A and the B sample. Don't quote me on that one, but I think it was 2 samples that tested positive. They allowed the fight to continue with Robson Conceição. And that was a fight where Conceição was outboxing Valdez, at least in the first 4 to 5 rounds of the fight. I think that Conceição left a lot on the table in the way that he fought the fight during the second half, where I feel he let Valdez back in the fight. Not that Valdez didn't have a say about that, and let himself back into the fight by, again, a lot of heart. It wasn't his best night by any stretch. Kept coming forward, kept applying intelligent pressure. Ended up arguably winning enough rounds where you could conceivably give him a decision. Robson Conceição obviously displayed a lot of skill in that ring, But, I thought that he might have edged it, but really I thought that going into the scorecard, it felt like it might have been draw-ish, which made me think, okay, this is kind of a homecoming style fight with a friendly crowd for Oscar Valdez. I could see the judges giving him some love, extra love on the scorecards. And, he did win a unanimous decision. Kind of like a disputed type win, especially with all the controversy going in. Wasn't a good look career-wise or reputation-wise for Oscar Valdez. He's been vocal about how much hurt he was going through during that time because of everything that was taking place. And I know a lot of people would look at that and say, well, what the hell? You're the one who should be responsible for what you are ingesting. And, you usually wouldn't let somebody off the hook if they are testing positive. I mean, if you test positive, you test positive. A lot of people carry a zero tolerance policy with that. And Oscar Valdez suffered that blow to his reputation. And so now he's coming against Shakur Stevenson, who, again, they've shared some of the same belts. They were both 126 guys that went up to 130. And Shakur Stevenson, if there was any knock on him, it was that he doesn't have like the deadly punch of a Gervonta Davis or a Teofimo Lopez or a Ryan Garcia. So as all of like the boxing fans, the ones who are really into the sport, were always pointing to and spotlighting how good Shakur Stevenson seemed in the sweet science, in distance control, and basically showing such a mature game at such a young age, defensive responsibility, all of that stuff. It was hard to kind of sell the casual fan on Shakur Stevenson relative to some of those other guys because his style was a little bit more nuanced to be able to appreciate than somebody who can just knock you clean out, or somebody who's just flashing a Gary Russell Jr. type of hand speed, or a Shane Mosley, Zab Judah type of hand speed. Not to say that Shakur Stevenson doesn't have fast hands. He absolutely has fast hands. But he was more so deconstructing opponent after opponent. Again, just winning just about every round. Southpaw stance, jab heavy, and totally dictating the terms of the exchanges. So we saw it against, as he was stepping it up against guys like Christopher Diaz, where Stevenson started winning some of those lesser NABO belts and Intercontinental style belts. And then a couple fights later is when he fought Joet Gonzalez for that vacant WBO featherweight title. And he beat Joet Gonzalez via unanimous decision. Another case of it's hard to find rounds to give to Joet Gonzalez because Shakur Stevenson is just looking that dominant, just looking so in control of the fight. And then COVID hit, and then, several months into the COVID summer, that's when Shakur Stevenson makes his 130-pound debut. So basically, as soon as he won the title, the vacant belt, against Joet Gonzalez, he goes to 130, knocks out Felix Caraballo in like the 6th round. That was, again, during the crowdless COVID summer, because just before COVID hit, Stevenson was supposed to fight Miguel Mariaga, somebody who's kind of gone from being like a contender to gatekeeper, but that fight never happened. Again, he fought Caraballo instead several months later. Then he fights Toka Conclary, kind of a slick fighter with enough skills and abilities to, go the 10 rounds. And again, he fought, I think, more competitively maybe than, well, I don't know if he fought more competitively than Joet Gonzalez. Again, it's hard to find a lot of rounds, multiple rounds, that Shakur Stevenson loses. So he beat Toka Conclary via unanimous decision, and then he fights Nakatila. Now, his Shakur Stevenson's win over Joet Gonzalez and then this win against Nakatila are actually wins that I feel are aging well because of what we just saw Nakatila do to Miguel Berchelt. And even before Nakatila had that opportunity to fight Stevenson, I looked at some of his other fights, and he is definitely somebody who comes in hot with the right hand. He is looking to throw that hard right hand early and often. It's a fast punch. He's got like a good reach with it, and he just throws it like a whip, and he's not afraid to use that thing. He'll just go for it time and time again. And he actually stuck Stevenson a couple times. So Stevenson was admittedly kind of cautious against Nakatila. And Nakatila, like Nakatani, when he overperformed against Teofimo Lopez, might be a problem, going forward in the division. We'll see how other people stand up against Nakatila because he fights pretty damn confidently. And he wasn't really backing up against Shakur Stevenson. No, he wasn't winning many rounds, but he was definitely making some of those moments interesting. But Shakur Stevenson, again, he was able to pretty much dictate the distance and the terms of the exchange and basically win the fight behind behind a jab and behind a lot of movement and taking exceptional angles to kind of get to the body really quick, go back up top, change levels, circle, and just doing a whole bunch of things to keep Nakathila out of rhythm. And then after that, Shakur Stevenson gets a title shot against Jamel Herring, who was coming off of a knockout win against, an older, way post-prime Carl Frampton. But it was still an impressive knockout for Jamel Herring, who doesn't have the reputation of being like a knockout artist. So he was kind of seen as being like a champ. He had defended the belt a couple times already, but he was still reputation-wise seen to be like a B-plus level fighter. I truly believe like all champs aren't really equal. It's like who you've been fighting, who you've looked impressive against, when did you fight certain opponents, just, your strength of schedule and your just overall resume. Jamel Herring, good fighter, but nobody was really mistaking him for being like a great fighter. Still, Shakur Stevenson had a task ahead of him, and so in his highest stakes fight, he fights Jamel Herring. The promotion was a pretty good one leading up into the fight, and Shakur Stevenson puts his foot on the gas in a way. We've seen Shakur Stevenson stop guys. He stopped Caraballo, he stopped Alberto Guevara, but he fought Jamel Herring like he was looking to make a statement. You know what I mean? Kind of like how we just saw Errol Spence trying to make a statement against Yordenis Ugas. I really feel like Shakur Stevenson, because they were both like buddies with Terence Crawford, they were like in some of the same circles. So this was kind of like not a grudge match, but they had some level of a friendly familiarity with each other. And they were both just looking to show out in their biggest moment. And Shakur Stevenson, the way that he fought the second round, it's about as close to perfection in the ring that you'll get in this particular era. Like, if you look at certain rounds of like Floyd Mayweather against Diego Corrales, you'll find moments of like perfection. And there's a stretch in that second round between like 30 seconds into the round to the closing bell of that round. The second round, go back and watch what Shakur Stevenson did to Jamel Herring. And Jamel Herring's a very respectable fighter. Andre Ward said late in that second round, as Shakur Stevenson's just boxing Herring's ears off, basically standing right in front of him, throwing a jab, then throwing like a hard left hand over the top, and just basically connecting with like 90% of his punches, it seemed. I didn't look at the punch stats, but it felt like 90% of those punches were landing. And this was like 15, 20 of these punches were just boom, and then like a 3-punch combination, hitting with every one. And every time Herring would punch back, not only would he be missing Shakur Stevenson, but Shakur Stevenson would come right back. He would like slip a jab, hit him with this, slip of this, and hit him with that. Like, Jamel Herring could not get anything going that round, to the point where after absorbing a ton of those types of punches, like with like a minute left in the round, Herring throws like a jab that kind of looks like that. And Andre Ward says that jab, Jamel Herring was trying to throw the jab and have that hand at home for defense all at the same time. It's not a good look, fellas. And like Bradley and the others kind of like laughed at that comment, because it was kind of sad in terms of how helpless in those moments Jamel Herring was looking in the ring. Shakur Stevenson shined that brightly, especially in that round. He would go on to, pummel him for several more rounds. And Jamel Herring did fight his way, kind of back into the fight. Not to where you would necessarily give him like 3+ rounds or anything like that, at least not on my scorecard. But he did make some of those rounds more competitive, certainly more competitive than that second round was. Well, they stopped the fight in the 10th round, and they didn't have to stop the fight, but Jamel Herring was taking a beating. He didn't protest too much. It was a little bit like maybe when they stopped the Anthony Joshua versus Carlos Takam fight. They didn't need to stop it, but it's like, okay, you can't be too mad at it. And that's the fight and performance that was really the, oh my God, yeah, he's really arrived performance. I mean, we saw how sophisticated this game was and how dominant he was against lesser competition, relatively. We'll see if Nakathila ends up being better than Herring, but we've seen how good Shakur Stevenson was looking in those fights, but he had a ferocity to him in the way that he fought Jamel Herring, and that excited a lot of people. So now we've got Oscar Valdez versus Shakur Stevenson, and just off the top, it's really hard for me to picture Oscar Valdez outboxing Shakur Stevenson. Yes, Oscar Valdez is a pretty good boxer. Yes, he does have a ton of heart. I just don't see him moment by moment winning, the 30-second pocket after 30-second pocket after 30-second pocket. I feel like Valdez on some level is going to just have to outwork Shakur Stevenson. I think he's going to have to kind of muddy the waters. Yes, he could try to throw that left hook, the beautiful left hook that he's developed. It looks like a lot of these Eddy Reynoso guys do develop a hell of a left hook. Now, Valdez had a great left hook when he was with Manny Robles, but there is something to be said about, Ryan Garcia, Canelo Alvarez, Oscar Valdez, all flashing this really nice left hook. But Valdez does have a nice left hook. He's got a pretty good right hand too, but I think that he's more reluctant to throw the right hand when he's not outboxing the opponent. So if, you got a Scott Quigg who's just going to stand in front of you, just going to come forward, knows no other way but to fight you and to keep coming, you don't have to look for him to throw the right hand and expect to maybe land it. Valdez going into the Scott Quigg fight said, fatigue doesn't come with throwing a lot of punches. Fatigue comes when you're missing punches. Valdez said that before the Scott Quigg fight. So when he's fighting guys like Miguel Berchelt, Scott Quigg, Adam Lopez, these guys that are going to bring the fight to you, he does start taking more liberties and throwing his right hand. Otherwise, when he's fighting guys like Robson Conceição, he's a lot more left-hand heavy. Yes, he's going to try to trap you and maybe let a right hand go when the opportunity presents himself, but he doesn't have the same confidence in letting the right hand go. So he'll try to jab his way, and then he likes to throw the jab followed by the left hook to the body where it's like boom, boom. And, he'll do like a lot of two-punch, one-handed combinations. And I think that he's going to try to take that approach because he's not going to be able to match jab for jab with Stevenson. I don't see that happening. So he's going to have to close the distance, but it's weird. You look at these guys and you would think that Stevenson's got like a, 3-inch height advantage. Well, Stevenson is really about an inch taller than Valdez, at least in what they used to list him at. Like when he was fighting Toka Khan Clary even just a couple years ago, he was listed at 5'7". I feel like they've added an inch to his height, kind of like they did with Floyd Mayweather. Like my dad had met Floyd Mayweather when he was still Pretty Boy Floyd at an airport, and Floyd was about, he said Floyd was about like 5'7" on the high side. Floyd, through like the second half of his career, the Mayweather Promotions side of his career, was listed at 5'8". I feel like I saw another inch creep on Shakur Stevenson in this last year. So I don't know if he's an inch taller than Oscar Valdez or if he's 2. But he's only got a 2-inch reach advantage over Oscar Valdez. You would have maybe thought that he had like a 3-4-inch reach advantage. But I don't think that the tail of the tape is going to tell the story when you factor in Shakur Stevenson's movement. I feel like his distance control, ability to throw that quick jab, that quick left hand, and to change levels and to fight a nuanced game is going to stymie Oscar Valdez. At least if Oscar Valdez thinks that he's going to box him from the outside. I'm really curious as to what type of strategy Eddy Reynoso and team are trying to employ with Oscar Valdez to give him a competitive advantage, because he doesn't necessarily like to fight like head to head, like phone booth. He'll fight in a close to phone booth, but like one step back to where he's able to get nice, like he wants you. Richard Dwyer, online boxing analyst, uses the term mid-range hooker. Oscar Valdez does like to have you right in that wheelhouse where the turn of his arm is what he's looking to catch you with. Yes, he'll throw that overhand right, but he more so wants you in this range where he could dig to your body with his most devastating punches and he could find you with the jab. I don't know if Shakur Stevenson is going to give him a ton of that distance. And I think that Shakur Stevenson has that level mastery of angles and distance to where there are going to be more moments in this fight where they're boxing at the range that Shakur Stevenson wants to fight and at the angles that he wants to exchange than they are going to fight in a way where Oscar Valdez feels confident that he's going to land a lot of the punches that he's throwing. So then what do you do at that point? It's almost like you have to then just come forward and make sure that you are kind of going for broke and going for Shakur Stevenson's body, his head, mixing up the attack, just making it a treadmill style fight, just an onslaught of activity. The problem is Oscar Valdez doesn't necessarily have the stay on high octane for the duration of the fight type of energy. He'll find spots to kind of give those types of bursts, but I feel like he'll find himself tired and getting beaten up if he does go for broke. So I kind of think that there's a decision that he's going to have to make, and that is basically, is he going to get stopped by over pursuing and then really taking a beating in the middle and late rounds, or is he going to fight a Toka Khan Clary, Joet Gonzalez style fight against Shakur Stevenson, where you are not pressing the issue to the point where he's just going to power punch you to death. And I don't know if Shakur Stevenson will be satisfied with cruising to a decision. I think that he wants to make a statement, and of course, if the opportunity presents itself to stop Oscar Valdez, he would love to. But at the end of the day, if you win like a 8 rounds to 4, 9 rounds to 3 style fight, you walk away with both belts anyway, your reputation grows, and hell, you could parlay that into, I don't know, perhaps fighting Vasily Lomachenko whenever he does return from the Ukraine, from the war-torn Ukraine. Because Lomachenko versus Stevenson is a fight that a lot of people have had their eyes on. But does Oscar Valdez have success in catching Shakur Stevenson with his power punches? Is he going to be able to kind of jump into the pocket and somewhat trap Stevenson or get Stevenson to fight you at a closer range? If he does, I don't see it being sustained. And if he does find himself in closer range with Stevenson in long periods of time, over the course of time, I think that that's potentially even worse news for Oscar Valdez, because that means that Shakur Stevenson is okay with fighting on the inside, which means that either he's figured something out or he's throwing uppercuts that he's finding you with. It's just hard for me to picture Oscar Valdez having success through long durations of this fight with Shakur Stevenson. At the end of the day, I really think that Shakur Stevenson is just not only a better boxer, but I don't think that the advantages that Oscar Valdez has, which might be, you know, the punches to the body or that left hook, you know, the power, and obviously a ton of heart. Not to say Shakur Stevenson doesn't have a ton of heart. I just haven't seen Shakur Stevenson in super difficult fights yet. I just haven't seen him have to like really show and bear all the grit that he has, because he's been so far and away outperforming all of his opponents. I think Oscar Valdez gives him a better run for the money, but I think that Shakur Stevenson still pulls off like a 8 rounds to 4 to 9 rounds to 3 style win over Oscar Valdez. Maybe even a knockdown at a certain point. But I don't think he gets a stoppage on Oscar Valdez. I'll give Valdez that much credit and that much respect in the heart that I've seen him display in the fights that he has had to bear all of the grit that he has in order to survive, let alone win the fight. Oscar Valdez, keep in mind, is still undefeated to this day. So I think that Shakur Stevenson will be brilliant against Oscar Valdez, and I think he's going to win the vast majority of the rounds. I think that there will be a question of, at certain points, is he going to stop Oscar Valdez? But I think Oscar Valdez will be tough enough and durable enough to go the full 12 here. But yeah, let me know what you think about Oscar Valdez versus Shakur Stevenson. I'm just glad that a fight like this is taking place in the 130-pound division. Hats off to both guys for daring to be great. But yeah, I'm taking Shakur Stevenson, and I don't think it's going to be a split decision. If it's a split decision, I think it'll be one of those controversial, what the hell was that type of scorecard, type of split decision. But if the judges' scorecards reflect what we see in the ring, I think that it'll be 8-4 on the closer to even side and 9-3 on the slightly more dominant side, with maybe a knockdown somewhere in there. But yeah, let me know what you think about Oscar Valdez versus Shakur Stevenson in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.